Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 8th virtual coffee morning, which TechSpark are hosting. Lots of you are now very familiar with the background of my kitchen. I'm delighted that this morning we're doing this event in collaboration with the Forum for Tomorrow. The Forum for Tomorrow is part of the Forum for the Built Environment. They have lots of forums in the construction industry. And it's particularly looking at young professionals and the future of the industry. So it's no huge surprise that the Forum is particularly interested in the impact of tech on property and the construction industry. Today, we have a really interesting panel. So we're going to have, hopefully, a really exciting, interesting conversation. As always, please do add questions in the right hand of the screen, in the chat section. That's pretty much it from me for now, other than to say, as always, thank you very much to our partners who enable all this to happen, which I'm sure if any of you go into the reception area, you can see their logos. Please do click on those logos and buy things from them, because that always helps. But pretty much that's it from me. We're going to be joined by a couple of other panelists in the next few minutes. But with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Louis, who's going to lead some of the conversation today. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Ben. And thank you, thank you again for everyone attending today. This type of event is quite new territory for both the FFT and FBE. So it's nice to use new technology and get stuck in. So before I introduce the panelists, I thought I'd just say why we're focusing on this topic. Now, technology has brought about a huge change in the industry, and it's allowed us to push the boundaries of what's possible and create more efficient and safer structures at the same time. Occupants are demanding more from their real estate, and cities are becoming more intelligent. So both are leveraging technology to help them do this. More recently, it's allowed projects to remain resilient despite the forced lockdown and closure of construction sites. Some examples of technology in construction are off-site construction, also known as design for manufacture assembly, which is facilitating rapid assembly of parts when they get to site. You've got things like virtual reality, which is enabling teams to see a structure without even being there, or wearables, which can track workers' movement and health, alerting workers before an accident can occur. Drones can be used to carry out more detailed surveys whilst being able to access hard-to-reach places. And to help combat the labour shortage, we've now got fleets of autonomous heavy machinery working, and one that people will know a bit more is building information modelling, or BIM, which is helping collaboration and allowing mistakes to be spotted before construction has even begun. And despite all of these new technologies, construction is one of the slowest evolving industries when it comes to embracing new tech, which will be a topic of discussion today. And as Ben said, we've got a fantastic panel to discuss it. So I thought I'd get them to introduce themselves, not that it needs it, but Mark, would you like to just start us off by introducing yourself and then telling us a bit about yourself?
Okay. Hello, everybody. Mark Stodgell, from a company called PCSG, Professional Construction Strategies Group. We help organisations of all sizes, really, with digital strategy and implementation in construction and property. We've also got an area of our business that supports bid management. I think I grew up on site. I can't remember when my dad taught me how to mix cement. I was sort of lucky enough to spend too much time in my youth on a Commodore PET or a Commodore 64 back in the 80s. And I came across AutoCAD, a piece of ubiquitous CAD software, when I was 17 in school, and I suppose I've carried on from there and involved in construction and architecture and technology since the early 90s. Get involved in all sorts, sort of large projects, small projects, and organisations. Recently, just before joining PCSG, I did a stint as head of BIM at McAlpine, and I also worked with a company called BIM Academy, who implemented building information modelling with organisations. Probably about me.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Garry, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Garry Fannon. I'm a director at Turner & Townsend. We deliver a number of services to the industry, BIM and information management, and data analytics, which seems to be a growing service where the appetite for data and visualizing it is ever increasing. We do scanning, so we've got drones and we scan sites. And so, yeah, there's a number of services that we cover. So my background, really, so people ask me, what are you doing, what are you about? I'm sort of a digital builder. I'm one of the few in the industry that has actually come through from construction. So I started out as a site engineer, setting buildings out, and worked my way up to be a site agent, managing building sites. And then moved in from there into design management. And during that period was where BIM and information management and digital ways of working started to inspire me to think differently. And then I've progressed to be head of digital for a large contractor called Wilmot Dixon, where we were changing the way we were trying to change the way we designed and delivered buildings. And now I've moved into consulting with Turner & Townsend. So I've got sort of a traditional background, and the way I look at technology is if I can understand it, most other people can understand it.
Fantastic, thanks very much. Just to let everyone know, we're having some slight problems with getting the last two panellists on. We've got Gavin Bridge from QBEX joining us and Alexandra Notay, but I'm sure they'll be joining us once Ben's managed to sort out those technical issues.
We're all chatting behind the scenes, so I'll keep doing that and hopefully be able to push people on as they arrive. But carry on.
All right, fantastic. I'll just crack on with the questions, and we can do an introduction for them later. So, Garry and Mark, what new technology has had the biggest impact in the last 10 years in our industry?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was on a call. We have in our organisation, we have a sort of during lockdown, we have a sort of half-hour call every day at about 5 o'clock, just as a wash up with the senior team. And I asked this question to my colleagues, and what we came up with actually is there's not much that's new in the last 10 years. Actually, it's more utilization of stuff that happened in the previous decade. But I think that, to actually specifically pick on things, I think it's the cloud applications and the move of stuff to the cloud and 4G to be able to access them. Yeah. And to me, we could pick drones and other bits and pieces, but I think those, to me, are the two real big ones.
I would disagree. So I was thinking similar, and the mandate back in 2016 was I think the government poking the industry, saying enough is enough now. I think there's yourself and farmers who are the two industries that are not adopting technology enough. That mandate has probably not has made an impact, but not as wide as we would like. But I would sort of echo what Mark said. Yeah, cloud computing, moving information to the cloud, the fact that we can move information from tablets, and when we talk about builders, the fact that many builders tell me that we're not very tech savvy, but every single one of them's got a smartphone in their pocket. The fact that we can move information around from the cloud to tablets just improves that wider spectrum of, and I think that has had the wider impact. So I would sort of echo what Mark says. But with that mandate back in 2016, I know it was the technology itself, but it was forcing us and certain projects to use technology, and I think is what the industry needed to start the journey.
Nice. just in the meanwhile, Gavin, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
I did see the introductions, by the way. I just was run the long link.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thanks for getting involved.
Sure.
I'll move straight on to following on from that point. You mentioned about 4G there. What are your thoughts on 5G and its availability? Is it going to be the last barrier to using on-site technology?
I think certainly one of the biggest challenges. I mean, Garry probably from his time at Kieran Wilmot Dixon. I mean, one of the biggest problems you've got when a site goes live is by the time you wait for OpenReach to put a cable in, you're up out the ground and the scaffolding's up. So you end up with these weird bonded 4G, sort of special devices to try and get internet connectivity for sites, often in rural locations. So 5G, I think, has got a big opportunity to unlock that. I think the thing that probably people, I certainly only found out a few months ago, there are significant issues with 5G indoors, and its penetration is not great. So I think we could it is a panacea potentially, but I think it needs to be localized networks still make a big still very important, particularly if you've got sort of Internet of Things connectivity. Just relying on 5G in a basement might not be possible.
The way I see, we always see, and we talk about technology as an enabler to do things differently. And 4G was definitely an enabler. The 5G opportunity is tenfold larger of an opportunity, and the fact it can do so much more, so much quicker, has so much more capacity than 4G. We've found this sparked the enthusiasm and the interest of people that normally wouldn't approach us, like ports. We had an inquiry from a port where they said, we believe there's some 5G being dug in the road nearby. What does that mean? What could we do with that? So I think the 5G rollout, although it has some good and bad press, and believe it or not, some people think it's linked to the coronavirus, which is ridiculous. I think that the 5G rollout is now sparking the imagination of people who normally wouldn't think about their facility or their asset and linking it to maybe the Internet of Things or a smart port, a smart town, a smart city.
Nice. So going on from there then, Gavin, I know you've said a lot on LinkedIn about what you think the future of real estate is looking like.
That's a bold statement, Louis.
Big data is a phrase that we're increasingly hearing about, and using it to make data-led decision making. So, from your perspective, how is technology being leveraged in real estate, and how is it being used to make space better for the user and for society? And do you think there is a crossover into the residential market in that?
That's quite a wide scope question, I think. I think the first thing is that my business, we're a property developer, urban regeneration. So I'll probably be talking more about property than perhaps construction, albeit I did start my working life in construction. I think in terms of site acquisition, yes, the sort of mining of data and is increasingly important, and there are lots of companies now purporting to be able to provide lots of data in terms of sites you might be looking for. But that really doesn't give you the ultimate decision about getting a computer to say whether one should buy a site or not. But in terms of sourcing all the information that will inform that decision, yes, we're seeing a lot more data on that. A frustration of mine, and it's really been a journey that we've been on as a company for about 4 years now, is trying to make our buildings smarter than they are. And something I've said before is that, probably everyone on this coffee morning today has probably got more technology in their home than they have in their office buildings. Office buildings really haven't changed in terms of their digital connectivity for years and years and years. And we, frankly, have been down a lot of cul-de-sacs over the last few years trying to engage with different companies. We've had We've seen a lot of companies that have been involved in sustainability have now drifted into trying to be smart buildings consultants. We've had presentations from university lecturers and things, and it really is a rapidly changing sort of field. But I think with COVID-19, I think we're going to start to see a convergence of smart technology in buildings with our reaction as a business to COVID-19. And I'm sure we can talk about some practical examples of that in due course. But really our focus as a business is not necessarily been in terms of the site acquisition bit, but it's really about delivering smarter buildings and giving our customers more interaction with the buildings. And I think there's certainly demonstrating how healthy they are. And just on the sort of touching on a sort of point, a tool we use is WiredScore. And if people haven't come across that, I suggest that you look into that. So that's an industry acquired accreditation that gives a sort of benchmark for digital connectivity of buildings. And certainly we're picking up things like 5G and 4G and the range of broadband providers and standard way leaves that occupiers then put for their buildings.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Mark, Garry, have you got any comments on that?
I've got a few. I mean, we do quite a lot of work with the property departments in large retailers, working with sort of.
I remember retail.
Sort of Asda, sort of Sainsbury's, and a lot of those have got quite sophisticated data analytics, GIS, and teams that sort of work out in the past where the best place for them to get information to where they develop. Yeah. Of course, that requires very specialist, graphical information system, clever people with PhDs and stuff to be able to program those that analysis. I think I've seen some other really good stuff in the sort of GIS space with local authorities working with housing associations, looking at land parcels and adjacency of ownership of land parcels, particularly in sort of back end of estates where you've got these garage complex next to maybe something else, and able to identify where they can put these land parcels together and create new development sites that potentially nobody had seen before. But these systems they're not very democratized down for people to use. So I think something there.
I think Mark, the challenge is that traditionally sites have been bought and sold by property agents. So there's a desire to hold on to that intellectual capital. So agents are producing their own systems, but one likes to think that data is more successful when it's shared, but I think there might be a reluctance to share data because that's that intellectual capital those agents charge for, and that can be a challenge in terms of site acquisition, really. I think. The property industry as a whole is quite traditional, and that is changing. And one thing that we try to do in our small way is support a more diverse. The property industry should reflect the diversity across society, and I think as we have that, there will be more appetite for embracing digital connectivity, smart buildings, healthier buildings, and just designing buildings in a completely different way, really.
There is an attempt in Manchester. Manchester tried to put something together. I think it was called New Manchester, which was a sort of a democratized GIS where you can turn off on all layers and look at connectivity for sites, throughout Greater Manchester. There was a slight security issue. Particularly when we go back to building information modelling, where some of that information potentially shouldn't be in the public domain, and it was closed down, and it was brought back up again with some of those layers taken off. But yeah, certainly, putting more information in the public domain. If we just think about going, I know the housing market's just been switched back on again. Just think sort of 15 years ago, we wouldn't have been sort of virtually touring streets using Google Street Map, street views and things. If we can democratize and get that information out there, then more people can utilize it. Louis, you probably want to introduce, sorry, Alexandra's just popped in on screen.
Yeah, thanks very much for joining us, Alex. Sorry about the connection issues.
All right, we discovered that actually using that you can watch a thing on an iPad, but you can't use it to join. So that's a good lesson to learn about appropriateness of tech. Anyway, thank you. I've been listening along, so it's all good.
Thanks very much. Would you like to just introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Alex Notay. I'm a fund director at PFP Capital. So we take on very large scale mixed use regeneration projects, but they're residential led and really placemaking led across the UK. And delighted that Gavin is one of our JV partners. So he's seen more than enough of me this morning already.
Not at all, Alex.
We'll try and crack on. And I have got a hodgepodge of a different experience background, and I've done a lot of consulting and advisory internationally, but both technology and adaptation, but also kind of modern methods of construction are real passions of mine. I worked with Mark Farmer on the Modernise or Die report, so I wrote quite big chunks of that. And I think one of the things, hearing what you guys have been talking about, I guess there are 2 points I'd like to make. One is that, we need this, and we know we need this kind of adoption of new methods desperately, and to get it to scale quickly in the UK. And that's before you factored in things like Brexit and the labour market and COVID. But actually, one of the big barriers is exactly the point that Gavin made there. As a real estate industry, we have a habit of not sharing and not playing nicely and keeping things very close to our chest. And actually, that kind of scale adoption cannot happen until you have kind of compatibility of component parts and some kind of systemization, so that actually if system A goes down, you can use system B without having to demolish everything and start again. You've also got to get past the behavior gap. So 15 years ago, I worked on quite a big global program with the World Economic Forum about catalyzing energy efficiency in offices. And companies would spend huge amounts of money and time and effort on buying the best gadgets and the whizzy tech, and they'd train up an FM to use it, and they go, yeah, in a year's time, this building's going to be the most efficient building ever. And actually what happened is quite often the FM would move on to a new job, and they couldn't be bothered to send anyone else on the training course. Everyone was a bit intimidated of all the scary buttons on the walls. So if they were hot, they opened a window, and they just kind of, nobody touched it. And then you'd find that the building energy use, despite this fanfare and this cost, had actually doubled. So you'd lost the goodwill of everyone in the building. But also, the kit on its own doesn't save it. Buildings don't use energy, people do. And if you don't engage that kind of behavior point, you're not going to get anywhere. And I think points that Mark and Garry were making about behavior around things like BIM and on site, you can have the most perfect BIM model in the world, but if you've got a well-meaning PM who goes, oh, I know I'm supposed to go into this funny model and get that part, but I've got one in my drawer, or my mate down at the yard can give me a part that'll work just as well, and he doesn't update it in the model, then it's redundant. So quality of information is something that as a sector we've got to get better at. All the data in the world is irrelevant if the inputs are wrong.
Yeah, I think, Alex, just one sort of thing just comes to my mind is a number of years ago in the office development, office market, there was a desire to incorporate what were called green leases. And there was a lot of pushback from occupiers who didn't want to share the data. So the idea was that people would share their energy consumption with the other occupiers in the building as a way of sort of bringing it together. There was a lot of pushback from occupiers, and I had it a number of times where somebody said, "Why do I want the lawyer on the third floor knowing how much energy I've used?" So there is a bit of a challenge there, I think. I mean, from a property point of view, Louis, I don't know who thought of this phrase, but I'm claiming it. Is what we want to try and create is the sort of building as a butler, really. So and there's a lot. I made reference earlier about the sort of journey we've been on. There's, and I don't want to go into sort of too much tech because it can sort of bore people, but there's a lot of closed protocols in the building service industry, and it's trying to use companies that have open protocols. So on our Halo office development we're just on site with at the moment, we've actually got embedded a smart buildings consultant as part of our design team, and it's something we've not done before. And they are really sort of championing the incorporation of smart technology and sort of reviewing the selection of materials and components as we go forward to make sure they are all open protocols and they will talk to each other. The idea being that our occupiers will have more connectivity with the building. So the building will know when you arrive in the morning and will pre-book a cycle space or a car parking space if you have a car parking space. It will know if you've booked meeting rooms and automatically book those. It will send out notes to guests about where they can park their bike and the public transport available, what their eating preferences are, and so on and so forth, and really take a burden away. So become like a virtual personal assistant, really. But I think with COVID, I think what we'll see is that the technology being used more around giving people more control of their immediate environment. So the ability to control the heating and lighting within certain parameters, the ability to call lifts. Also the way that the space is controlled within the office buildings, and at an affordable level, you can put in monitoring that will track people's movements around some space. So those that are making decisions can look at, after a period of time, how efficient space is used. And I think now we're talking about social distancing. It can give alerts, I think, on when people are clustering when they perhaps shouldn't be, and also looking at how efficient desks are used. So I think we're going to see a move away from desk sharing for a period of time. And I think certainly the occupancy density is going to move out again. And we're going to see sort of shift working, I think, and maybe people working 1 week in, 1 week at home, or maybe days in, days out. And, we'll see different companies taking different approaches. But I think the ability we have with the data in people's mobile phones and in buildings, provided we build it into the sort of base build, I think we can embrace this really. I think there's also a connection with health and well-being and air quality. So at the moment, everyone's very nervous. I mean, I think it was it was Garry that alluded to the fact that there's some reluctance in certain areas about 5G. Well, I think if we can give people control over their environment and give them readings about what the CO2 levels are, what the pollution levels are in around their buildings and CO2 levels, I think that will give people reassurance about their environment as well. So, technology can be a positive thing rather than being a negative thing, and that Big Brother's watching you, really.
I think it's quite interesting what you're saying around the trying to make sure that open protocols. We did a technology demonstrator a couple of years ago with BDP, big architects practice in their Manchester office, where we had a conceptual idea for an app that would sort of sort out workplace quality in terms of, am I too hot, am I too cold, is it too noisy? And the design was to connect to the building management system, and the pain to connect that building management system and then understand what it was coming out, it was getting in the way. So we just deployed some really cheap sensors into the office that did temperature, noise, CO2, and the big thing that jumped straight out in some of the meeting rooms was the CO2 levels going absolutely through the roof.
Yeah.
And you think, well, at the time we were really interested in, okay, how does that CO2 level affect decision making in boardrooms? But actually, it may be, I mean, I'm not a scientist, but maybe the CO2 levels high is going to also say, well, potential risk is there's not enough air changes going on for COVID.
What I was saying in a residential, in a build to rent space I spent a lot of time in 2-3 years ago, we knowing all the sensors and if we want to, we can have sensors in the furniture that tell us exactly who has sat where for longest. It's remarkably kind of intrusive in some ways, but I've been saying, it's not going to be long before people do have air quality monitors on their phone, and we'll be able to say to a landlord, your building is making me sick, if we don't make the genuinely sustainable changes. If any of you followed Josh Artis, who runs the Centric Lab, he's do some really interesting stuff that combines kind of neuroscience with the built environment work, and they've got huge amounts of data that I work with them a little bit, and they've got stuff around productivity and well-being, and the sign that if you could turn up the oxygen levels in an office in the afternoon even slightly, you could see a productivity uptick. Though, and sadly, it's only when you used to type things like that you could get building owners to really take it seriously. And I think one of the things I'm excited about is the kind of the frontline people, the main staging of facilities managers and people who run the technical side of those buildings, and understanding how important that is to people's health, well-being and productivity might actually steer some real changes in the way that we design and develop real estate.
There's not that many case studies out there. So Pete, we've been doing this digital thing now since 2016, and sort of 4 years on, where's the actual hard evidence that it works? Because a lot of people have to put business cases in to go down the digital route or to invest in this. I think the industry is missing that big piece. I mean, you spoke about FM. I've been waiting for FM to say, this is brilliant. This is the game changer. The feed of all of that lovely data through to our completed building, and I'm feeding now an efficient FM team, and my costs have come down. It's just not there yet. I don't know whether we need to wait.
The Institute for FM and the RSCS did a joint report, because I launched it for them at MIPIM 2 years ago, and they did a massive global study on it. So they have loads of data and loads of cases. It's all anonymised. And I think, again, it's what they've not been able to do is get that in front of the people who are the decision makers to influence actually adopting it.
Decision makers are going to go, what's in it for me? You want me to what? Architects' fees are potentially going to go up. Oh, okay, construction probably isn't, but there may be some hidden costs in there because there's additional people now managing a process that weren't there before. Do I get any faster? Probably not yet. Is it any better quality? Probably will be difficult to measure. And what about the cost? Well, I don't know. Is it more cost effective? So we need all of these hard case studies, because business decision makers need that case study, that hard evidence to say, yeah, we're going to do it. There's clearly some evidence it works. And I've been waiting, and I'm glad you've said that. I'll go research that paper for FM to start to change their model, because I know that others have.
But Garry, is it not the problem? Is our procurement and short term?
Yes.
I mean, is it the fact that the people building it, the developers are not incentivized in a way to create something? They want to just sell it to us, put it into a special purpose vehicle and off it goes. The person who's going to build it is going to hand over it and throw it over the fence. They've got no idea. I mean, even with a school, a number of secondary schools I've been involved with, where you say, well, who's going to be running this thing? And they go, we don't know, no idea. There'll just be a guy maybe who'll live in a flat in the corner of the thing and have a DeWalt drill, a hammer, and a load of keys. It's something fundamentally that needs to be looked at.
Well, there's a couple of things there. One thing, and Alex's passion particularly, that I think that the wider facilities management, it's managing the building. It's about looking after people. That's what we should be doing, not looking after the building, really. And I think that's something that multifamily build to rent, as known in this country, has really embraced. And that the caliber of people that look after our build to rent schemes is far, in my humble opinion, than the ex guy who was in the Navy behind a desk in an office building being grumpy to people when they walk into a building. So that's going to change. But I think that in terms of the decision makers, Alex is a fund manager and I'm a property developer. We can make a compelling case about why investing in smarter buildings and more sustainable buildings are the right thing to do. It just makes business sense. So for example, we're on site with an office building now. We've finished an office building more recently. So our Aurora office building, we'd let prior to construction completion. Our Halo building, we just finished the demolition. We're about to start the basement excavation. We've pre-let 3/4 of it to Osborne Clark. And the reason why companies like Simmons & Simmons and Osborne Clark take space in our buildings is because they are healthy and they are increasingly more smart. And those buildings, there's always going to be someone that can develop something cheaper than you. There's always someone going to take a shortcut. But if you're going to attract the right sort of occupiers, then you've got to deliver smart, healthy buildings, and they're inextricably linked, those two topics for me. I know there is evidence.
But Gavin, I think it's really interesting, that point, and what Garry was saying earlier about, sadly, a lot of the times people still want to see it on the bottom line. So we've known, as our house, have been a kind of ESG impact focused investor since we started. That's part of our core principles. But actually, I know from when I used to go and try and persuade people to, spend a little bit of money on better kit or on green things. Frankly, the cost savings were a rounding error from a kind of a landlord or an investor point of view. They weren't big enough shifts, and it was too risky and too fiddly. And it was that kind of backstage FM stuff doesn't matter. It's brilliant that it's in the spotlight now, but it's actually pushing through that adoption. I still think it's seen as discretionary. So you'll see that people go, well, the big guys can do it. But actually getting it to be adopted just as universal practice, that is really the challenge. Well,
with great respect, Alex, you're unusual in respect that you're a female fund manager. A lot of them look like me, white, middle class, sort of overweight bloke.
You've got far too much hair.
Yeah.
That's all right.
But I think the challenge is, we can demonstrate. So with our Aurora building, the headline rents in Bristol were £28.50 for 10 years, and we took them up to £35, and that's a demonstration of the quality of the build. And that's all about healthy buildings and smart technologies.
And you created your own benchmark to do that.
Yeah, and I think that the investors in those. I think that I would suggest, respectfully, the blockage is possibly around the fund managers, because the underlying investors, and I think particularly local authority pension funds, are really keen to invest in more sustainable buildings, I think. but they tend to move as a pack, really. But there is more of a trend towards it, and I think you're right. The evidence has to be given there, but there is a challenge, because why would we as a developer and working with Alex as a fund give away all our intellectual capital to somebody else, really? I think.
Can I ask, you clearly know what you want, and you clearly know that by making an environment this particular way will reap dividends in regards of what you charge per meter per square foot. How did you go from to this point of we clearly know what we want? Because in my experience, the majority of our clients have no clue. They said, I want a building. And when we start to ask the question about what do you want that building to do, and they said, well, just hold out the rain and be warm would be a great start. How have you got to this point?
Well, I kind of think there's a bit of both, really. There's an element of we don't know what we want until we've seen some options, and I think that's been a bit of a challenge. But we've tried to. It's been a bit of a journey. We've had quite a few false starts, to be honest with you. But we've got a consultant now that has done this elsewhere, and I think it's about trying to. The property industry and the construction industry tend not to. If you had a Venn diagram, the overlap is not very great. I think COVID is a big push now, and I think that will be a real sort of catalyst in moving sort of the installation of smarter technology into buildings, move it forward.
Do you see smart consultant being the new person who sits in the middle of all of the other designers?
Yeah.
Who has an independent role to ensure that they're getting the best out of all of the disciplines? Because it feels like it doesn't sit with an architect, doesn't sit with M&E. It feels like someone that should be sat in the middle with the users in mind, or the owner in mind, to ensure that they're maximising the opportunity.
Well, it's interesting, even the language that Garry used, and then I would always talk about customers rather than users or end users. And I know sometimes it crosses over to the public sector, that sort of phraseology. But now we've got a smart buildings consultant embedded into our design team, and I think that they are suggesting that actually the installation of technology shouldn't cost any more money. By using technology and open protocols, one should be able to deliver that as sort of cost neutral. But I think the benefits to occupiers will be seen as we start to see more of it in workspaces. That I was talking to an occupier yesterday, and they were saying in their office building, I won't say where it is, they've been looking at flexible working, and they got a team of about 350 in the city that they're in, and they can probably accommodate 100 at a time. So they're going to try and work out how to do that. Now, I think technology could play a part for that. So I think we'll see that encouraging people. Embracing it, really. And the sort of businesses that we work with in terms of occupiers, they are on this journey. And in fact, because they're not in property or construction, they're way ahead, I think.
There's been a lot of discussion about user reassurance, and I'd like to move this conversation onto sort of the safety side of it, and discuss the impact of the Hackett report. And for those who don't know, the Hackett report was commissioned by the government as an independent review as a result of the Grenfell Tower tragedy, and it pins down and highlights the failings which have pervaded the culture of the construction industry, and recommended a major shake-up to building control. And one of those suggestions that I'd like to talk about is the proposed golden thread of information, which is required from design stage to user occupation. And this is in the hope of improving that openness, transparency, and accountability. And the discussion around the golden thread is sort of centered around high-rise buildings, which is perhaps inevitable with Grenfell in mind. And this will require a lot of technology and data to make happen. So what's the panel's view on whether government-mandated triggers like the golden thread or BIM level 2, are these the only way to move the industry forward in terms of digital?
So I have and again, this is personal, not a house view. I should say that quickly. But there's an important digital element here, and I think anything that breaks down the silos between the various elements of design, construction, build, and operation is good, and it's an important thing. But when Grenfell happened, I talked to a number of friends and former colleagues in the States who manage very large high-rise buildings, and they said, we have fires all the time in high-rise residential, and people don't die. the States because of two reasons. Because we mandate like external staircases, you know, the kind of metal stairs that you see in kind of New York in the movies, and we have a superintendent who, you know, you mandate somebody whose job, who lives on site, who manages, who is that physical liaison with the fire service should they be needed, who knows the layout of the building, who knows the issues, who knows the residents. And I think for me, the saddest thing of the many awful things about Grenfell is that we, as I said, we used to have those skills within the social housing sector. You know, there were experienced managers who did live on site and did know the building. The fact that we got to a stage where the fire service were working from out-of-date plans and there wasn't anybody there who knew the building, who could manage an evacuation effectively and take that call, you know, that is a failure of operations. And beyond the fact that actually that should not have been a building that was deemed appropriate for anybody to live in, let alone the poorest and most vulnerable people. So yes, there's a huge thing for digital, but actually there's analog solutions that we had and we neglected.
Yeah. So when the hacking report happened, the insurers of all the main contractors came knocking and said, you need to tell us every building you've built in the last 10 years with that cladding on. Do you know how long it took us to find out? About a year.
Yeah, I bet.
Ridiculous. We got away with mismanaging information for a generation, really. So we've done our duty of care. We built a building. We produced some O&M manuals. We delivered the O&M manuals to the customer. We've forgotten about it. We left them on a server. And when it came to finding out what we built 10 years ago, one, most people have forgotten. And then two, we didn't trust the information. So we'd find the O&M manual on a server and say, right, it's XYZ cladding. Did we actually put that on the building? And everyone's looking at each other. We don't know. We're not 100% certain we have to be. So we had to send people out to actually physically look at the building to check that our O&Ms and the building were tied together. And luckily, we didn't have an issue. But what that showed, for a generation, we devalued and not treated information with any sort of respect. And for me, the proposal for the consultation paper which went out in June last year there is a recommendation that there is a digital thread, but it's not clear what that is. But the BIM option for me is not clear whether mandating BIM modelling over 18 meters is going to happen. And I think that should. I think most people who have commented it say it's the right thing to do. For me, it will kickstart the residential industry into going through the same journey that the main other sectors have gone through, which is all architects and all designers will now start to model. It will give better out. So I think this is another thing,
though, Garry, is you know, going back to what Alexandra was saying, that the problem is just in the analog section. I mean, I've got an office block that I was doing some BIM on, whatever you want to call it, into consultancy a few years ago. But you know, just the attitude to O&Ms from that contractor was, well, you know, it's something we give the graduate engineer in the corner of the cabin something to do in their summer job.
Yeah.
And you ask what the budget for this O&Ms would be, you know, price maintenance manuals, handover stuff, and it was 25 grand on a 60 million pound office job. And you start to think, okay, if you, the example I normally give is anybody who's into, you know, had a car when they were younger that was falling apart. You had a Haynes manual that told you every, you know, the way that car operated. Now, I totally understand that the fact that, you know, that we build one-offs and it's more complex to put together that, you know, guidebook, that handbook to the building. But I've got educational clients who just sit there frustrated that they just want, forget full O&Ms, they're not even getting accurate as-built general arrangement drawings. And it's because you've got this problem of architects, professions, empty insurance saying, oh no, you can't possibly mark something as built. You've had an erosion of fees where nobody's prepared to go back and pay to get this as built. And then you've got the design build world doing, you know, product change and clients, you know, making changes. And then, you know, there's no money in that process to get those drawings updated. So whether it's in a 3D model world or whether it's in traditional analog world, just having up to date and decent quality information that's checked, that's handed over and then looked after and curated through that's the big thing. I mean, there's a new office of I can't remember, it's an offshoot of the health and safety executive that's getting set up to look after this. But I think going back to what Louise was saying earlier, you know, maybe it just does need government to say, I'm sorry, guys, you've got to do this, whether it's asbestos or Legionella or the golden thread or bin level 2. I think, unfortunately, where we've got this short-term world of costs, we just need a kick.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree at all. Yes. So just on that point, we were working with a local council and a large building which was built for the Commonwealth Games a few years ago, and that building is now being refurbished. You would think they would have an accurate set of drawings that they could use to refurbish this particular building. They've completely thrown a lot in the bin, or they could only find half of them. They've thrown the rest in the bin, and they spent 6 months redrawing a building and spending countless amounts of taxpayers' money because they didn't manage information properly. And that for me is a case in point. Every building that we build at a point in time will need refurbishing, and so the design phase at that point should be represent or replicate the information you've got at the time. And quite clearly, this bad practice of poor information management is costing the end user or the customer lots and lots of money for me.
I think it can build a business case around it as well. I mean, we've done a series of surveys with some end users in property management businesses, and just lack of information and the time searching for it, and then mistakes being made on small refurbishments and interventions because the drawings are wrong is huge. Sorry, Gavin.
No, I was going to say. All I was going to say was that I think the enlightened ones will always be moving forward in the right direction. I think that ultimately it comes down to legislation. So maybe there's a role for the health and safety executive here, in the same way they carry out and do audits, and the fire authority do inspections. Maybe there's someone to come down and audit the quality of the information that's held about the building. Maybe.
Well, that is happening for buildings over 18 metres residential.
Yeah.
But I mean, not necessarily in terms of fire safety. I mean, other matters really, perhaps.
And I think the challenge is that there is a logic to say the levers for this should be policy, and it should be so the content or whatever. That's how we'll mandate it, and then it should be done. We'd all like to live in a world where everybody just complied and it didn't need to be checked, but it does. And then you go into well, where is the resource for that? Frankly, to when we already know that local authorities and central government are, even pre-COVID, were extremely constrained. Budgets have been cut for years, and there is not the expertise or the resource to keep an eye on everything. And so you then get into that dangerous territory where it only takes one PM trying to be helpful but cutting some corners. And I've seen it happen on a huge range of tall buildings and houses and everything in between. And some inadvertent short-term saving has incredibly negative long-term consequences. And unfortunately, I think policy is not enough. You can't say, oh well, they broke the rules and so it's their fault. We don't have the capacity in our government systems, even before COVID, to enforce those regulations. So actually it is much more about the forcing as an industry kind of everybody to step up and say, no, it's not enough just to say, oh, we tried to make it a bit greener or a bit more techy, but it was too expensive, so we stopped. It's about everybody being accountable in the team.
Yeah, I think you're right, Alex. I mean, I think it could be a case of, so a local authority pension fund saying, well, I am only invest in buildings that are BREEAM outstanding or LEED Gold or achieve a WELL standard. And I think that's the tool that will then compel a less enlightened fund manager than yourself to sort of follow that.
Well, Blackstone and Goldman Sachs have both mandated not to invest in non-diverse companies with non-diverse boards. It's that kind of, as you said earlier, sadly, it's a bit follow the money, but it does make a difference.
Yeah, I think an accreditation would help. That when you are handing over data to an FN company, that they demonstrate that they're keeping that information live and fresh and up to date. And I think if you don't check them, it won't happen. So I think that a national accreditation scheme to demonstrate to future investors that it's being done and that the information is being managed properly would help.
Yeah, just on the Greenfield point, Louis. I mean, my personal view is it's really down to institutional neglect of the building. To be honest with you, I think very sadly, I'm just very conscious that. Open up the sort of debate a bit wider, that in Bristol we have quite a vocal group of people that are actively campaigning against taller buildings. And I think one of the things that I've seen drift into the conversation now is that whenever a taller building is being suggested, they are sort of bringing in sort of Grenfell and fire safety and things like that. It becomes quite emotional. And we have to be very, very careful around that. There is nothing, inherently wrong with living in a taller building. And if we're going to deliver more dense cities, and we need that, we need to look at being smarter in the way that we build, really. It's just to flag that. I mean, I can see technology playing a part in reassurance around fire safety, but ultimately, if a building owner, or that could be the individual homeowners, or it could be an entity like a housing association, if they're going to be trying to save anything that's not life-saving, then that ultimately there will be problems further down, because they just cut it back on essential services.
Examples. I mean, if you look at the stock transfers that happened into housing associations sort of 15, 20 years ago, the basic surveys that were done at stock transfer were all about the houses themselves, and they're very basic amounts of information. There's now problems with trees, unrestrained walls going over, housing associations mowing land they don't even know they own, and not maintaining stuff they do own. It generally, I think, as soon as you take, there's been the introduction of the PC, the thing that all of us are utilizing, has made us all responsible for our own filing. Whereas 20 years ago, there was people whose jobs it was to make sure information was looked after. And I think we maybe need to bring back some of those people who are responsible for curating information in all, it doesn't matter whether it's our own companies, unless we're forced to do it for things like HR or health and safety, it seems to get, forgotten and lost.
Good point.
Thank you very much for those comments. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll just throw one more question into the pile before we move into Q&As. In sort of some concise statements, what do the panel think the future of technology and construction looks like?
Complicated and interconnected.
Yeah. I want a dog.
So I get probably 10 approaches a week from various kind of prop tech entrepreneurs and small businesses who have designed an element of the process and a way to make that faster, better, digital, and almost never and need to be able to say, A, they always want to pilot, so I'm not going to let you guinea pig on all of our stuff, but B, it's too small on its own. So my thing is always go away, find out the people either side of you in the value chain and partner up with them and figure out, make sure, as the guys were saying earlier, make sure that your tech talks to each other, that the APIs across, there's a litany of systems that are in the market who, particularly ones that have been around for a couple of decades and like, well, we just work like this, we don't partner with anybody. And actually that's not good enough anymore. All systems need to talk to all systems. They need to be open access, and that data needs to be shareable but secure, and it's complicated. And I think in the construction process particularly, because there's such a range of regulatory but also operational factors in there, it comes down to that point that Garry made. Is it going to be faster? Maybe. Is it going to be cheaper? No. Are you going to have the flexibility of tinkering with the design? No, you have to lock it for much earlier on, but it is going to become more mainstream. So we just have to get our head around it.
Yeah, I think just some sort of sound bites, really. I think that what the market will have is a flight to quality, I think. So we'll see that from investors. And I think that really what I echoed before, I think there's a convergence of smart technology with the reaction to COVID-19, and the phrase you used earlier about the sort of building as a butler, really. So, corporate office spaces will be more interactive with their occupiers. I think that's a positive thing, provided we can get around some GDPR challenges.
I think for me, it's the game changer is going to be the existing building stock and budget retrofit of technology that makes people's lives easier. So whether that's monitoring sort of humidity in social housing, or air quality in social housing, and being able to do that reliably, I think that's the game changer that we need. That certainly isn't there at the moment en masse, like Alexandra says. They're just all point solutions, nothing joined up.
For me, it's maybe blockchain. I can see that having an industry-wide impact as we use that sort of technology to improve cash flow, and I can see off-site manufacturing just to meet the demand. I mean, the thing for me was when Legal and General's opened their factory. I thought, wow, if an insurance company can do it better than we can, well, that's a big statement. So I can see offsite going through the roof just purely to meet the demand, and that's all driven through technology.
Hopefully, the architecture won't diminish, though. I do have my nervousness about that. Not with LNG, I must say, but just joking.
Well, yeah, but I think the majority of the units that will go through there will be fairly generic, but there is customization within the process, and I think architecturally and aesthetically, you can change facades quite quickly.
You can.
Isn't the issue?
Well, I think there's a really key point there that one of my bugbears is about the kind of assumptions of quality that's permissible to vary. So, before Grenfell, I used to have people coming up to me, and obviously Places for People is the kind of parent company of 50 Capital, is one of the largest registered providers in the UK. And I used to have people say to me, oh no, we've got this fantastic modular system. It's really, really cool. It would work. It'd be all right for social housing. And I'd always say, stop talking to me. The quality of what we build has to be the same. We might fit it out slightly differently and we might charge different price points, but don't come to me with something that is an inferior product and tell me that you think it's okay to flog it to an RP. That's not good enough. And I think, unfortunately, that has been done.
Yeah,
it has. I completely concur.
Well, thanks very much for that. I'll just go to, I think we've got time for one question before we move into the networking. So Barry and Davies from the Q&A chat said, with regards to the shortfall in information management, could it be due to the nature of the design and build projects and liability?
Totally agree. Yeah, no. I think, I can't really talk too much about it, but I've been in a situation where there's been a Cat A office block built. So that's an office block built so that essentially it's just a shell with basic, floors and ceilings. And then the Cat B fit out and design had to be, because of procurement, by our completely separate teams because they weren't on the right frameworks. And you end up with, it's just nonsense, stuff being put into the building that A, was going to get ripped out straight away, and then B, trying to amalgamate these two sets of information and people trusting other people's information. It's just broken.
I have a procurement anecdote on that I think is a really important one. So I was a civil servant when the London bombings happened in 2005. And one of the most challenging things around the whole, in the aftermath when, firefighters were having to go down into hideous conditions in the tube and extract bodies and, in wreckage from those bombs, was that because of decentralized procurement of hazmat gear, it turned, and they called in a lot of firefighters from different authorities around the UK, it turned out that no one's kit was compatible. So you had different size valves for different oxygen tanks in people's kind of suits, protective gear, and it radically slowed down and prolonged the kind of clean-up process in horrific, traumatizing conditions for those firefighters, because someone's good idea about good government procurement and decentralizing it all meant that none of it was compatible. And that's, I always have that in my mind when we talk about things like MMC or anything like that. It's got to be about making sure that the system works as well as the individual project. And often that gets caught up in things around procurement and legal that just shouldn't be a barrier. People are doing their best to try and protect and create a sensible structure, but they're not operable. They're not thinking about how it would be used.
And that's incentivization. I think what I was saying earlier, if the contractor is not incentivized to provide decent information for the next person, then they just don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say though that there's been a couple of comments there about design build as a form of procurement. I think you can do any project using a design build form of procurement. I think that for me, eminently, the contracting organisation is the best place to build. Really, I think it's about a good brief and it's about working together from the start. And I think the topic of today is about smart buildings and embedding that from the start. I think in the brief, there's a challenge in the property industry with the way the BCO guidance sets out shell core and Cat A and then Cat B fit out, and we have done Cat B fit outs for some of our customers, but there just seems to be I don't know what an inference that an occupier wants to do their own fit out really rather than us doing it. But we try and work around with our occupiers to sort of in our developments to sort of set things up. So because there is, as you say, a huge amount of waste with materials and things, and when people start doing their fit out.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think we'll draw the conversation to an end there. Thank you very much to all of the panelists for coming on. It's been some really, really interesting conversation. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us.